It is 7 o'clock on a Sunday night, and you know what that means. It's Topical starts right now. A very good evening to you, South African, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical. Our digital audience with us tonight about to pop up. Among them, they're from Wits University, UJ, and UCT. It's looking forward to getting their questions for our guests in a short while. Listen, we smack bang in the midst of election season, right? Almost time to exercise the franchise, as they say. And by all accounts, by many accounts, one would say, you don't just give away your franchise, your votes. Those after it, they need to work for it, right? Hence the rallies, hence the manifesto launches, and so on. And with all these parties registered, independents, etc., you seemingly spoiled for choice. But do we have a disillusioned voter population? And if so, if the electorate is disillusioned, does more parties, more independents necessarily mean more choice? Election manifestos, a list of policies and intentions, views on certain issues that have the potential of changing your life in the main for the better. Question, how much stock do you put into these manifestos? How do you see the political state of play being weighed up in terms of policy talk, values, concrete plans to fix on one hand, and on the other, coalition talk, who should be president, premier, etc. What about these packed stadiums during these manifesto launches? Does it necessarily equal votes? We will discuss. The mission, to try and pull back the curtain a bit and give you a window into the national state of play, which leads us to the question of the week. And we're asking you, in this day and age, what impact do election manifestos have in the way you vote? Let us know at It's Topical SABC. Come, walk with me. Let's get you some perspective. Who reads election manifestos, cover to cover? Does it matter in this day and age? And do political manifestos, election manifestos, really influence voters? Share your thoughts with us at It's Topical SABC. Perspective coming up. All right, let's get you some context, and as always, we're going to turn to the magic wall, what we know and why it matters. My guest tonight, SABC News political reporter Samkele Maseko, joins me now live. Thank you, sir, for your time. We need context with regards to these manifestos. You've covered a number of manifestos. But look, what we know about them, blueprint, policy ideas, right? Said to empower voters, shape public opinion, etc. But here's the question. Are they reliable? What are people saying?
A frank and honest answer, many South Africans don't read these particular manifestos unless you are of the middle class and of the business fraternity and also one of the bureaucrats in government, also a researcher as well. Then you would tend to go to these policy documents or these manifestos of these political formations. But if you ask an ordinary gogo in Chatsworth, an ordinary gogo in Savannah Park, an ordinary gogo in Vembe, Umshwati, in Applespoort, in Hlatikulu, in Escort, they don't particularly read these manifestos because what matters to them is their bread and butter issues, the material change of their conditions at that point in time. Cyril Ramaphosa, Vilonkosini Tabisa, Julius Malema, John Steenhuisen, Peter Mulder, Peter Groenewald, speaking at a stadium for them is immaterial if they are still having no electricity, no water, no food, and no access to education for their kids and grandkids.
So this becomes important, right? How media portrays or give perspectives and context in terms of manifestos.
It becomes important how the media covers these particular manifestos, but also what is important is the day-to-day, the eyeball-to-eyeball, the flesh-to-flesh communication between the voters and the political players in the country, whether it be their foot soldiers on the ground, whether it be political leaders. But the most important aspect here, Blaine, is there needs to be that human feel in a political leader for South Africans to be able to relate with them. Let's use the Western Cape as an example. You'd remember when our colleague was covering soda, those constituencies and residents of Western Cape, they were saying they can't relate with the DA, particularly with those from the Muslim community, because the DA has taken a stance that is against the Palestinian people, which they are very passionate about, and then it pushes a particular segment of them towards the ANC, PMU, and other political formations who are sympathetic to the struggles of the people of Palestine. It all boils down to humanity.
It's a very important point that you raise, because it goes, and we've learned this from not only South Africa but other elections as all around the world, it goes beyond policy. It goes beyond what is being done. It's the feel of whether I like you, I can trust you, I believe what you're telling me. I want you to look at this, Samkele. It is research from BMG Research. It's 2017, right? But talks about the UK electorate. And this is what they say in terms of who reads political manifestos. 23% say sometimes. 19% saying never, not interested. And here again, we were talking about in terms of depending on media. A large chunk is depending on media. Very worrying that, no, 10% saying never, but interested. Now, how does, obviously we don't have a forensic analysis of what's happening in South Africa currently with regards to this, but from what you're hearing on the ground in terms of people interested, the packed stadiums, how does that translate? How should we read that?
The packed stadiums is immaterial to the voters. People go to stadiums for T-shirts, people go to stadium for the artists that perform at those particular stadiums. They go there for Kuzani, for all of those Maskandi artists. They go there for the various artists that are there within the country whom are performing at these particular events. But they don't totally listen to the message that is being delivered to them. If we were to ask many ordinary South Africans, how much did the EFF promise in their manifesto or commit in their manifesto that they would hike social grants by? Very few would actually know. If you ask them what Cyril Ramaphosa promised them that the ANC would do at the stadium, very little. But if you go to an area such as Escort and you move to an area in the areas of Utugela, where there is largely no water at times, people are not particularly cared about electricity that much. But if you don't give them water, then it becomes a problem for those people of Umsinga in particular, where it's a very scarce water area. And then electricity is just a by the way. But the basic necessity of life, which is water to them, is one of the main issues that these political formations have tended not to speak about more in their manifestos. Issues of climate change. You just look at the weather today in Gauteng. It was blistering, scorching hot during the day. But towards 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, there was thunder, there was rain, and there was a little bit of a hailstorm. And that speaks about issues of climate change. It also speaks about any issues pertaining to our energy security, particularly when it comes to renewable energy within the country. How will South Africa be able to mitigate climate change, which is affecting renewable energy? Solar panels will not be able to generate that much heat because of the uncertain weather conditions that South Africa is now evolving into. And that feeds into particular sectors of society and how they perceive climate change. You go to Alexandra. They're not speaking about issues of housing, issues of Alexandra being clustered, little room to move, which has become a paragon of bad governance and failure of a democratic government. And those are the material issues that South Africans want to see and be attended to, as opposed to political pomp and flair at these particular stadiums, which, in my view, it's a show of force that you've got these particular supporters. But if Blaine were to use the voter base of 2019 and use these particular results, filling up Moses Mabhida, a 65,000 capacity stadium, which the ANC filled, the IFP filled, automatically that gives you one seat in Parliament, 1.5, because in the results that were used in 2019, 45,000 guaranteed you one seat. That particularly tells you that the EFF filling FNB Stadium, 90,000 capacitor, they've got 2 seats. ANC filling Moses Mabhida with their overflow, let's give them 2 seats. IFP with the overflow, let's give them 2 seats. So in the greater scheme of things, in a country where the ANC gets it up on odd 11.3 million votes, and the next biggest party gets about 3.3 million votes, the Democratic Alliance, you see the gap there. And it tells you that the DA did not fill any stadium. But I can tell you, they will move towards that 3 million mark of voters.
Look, optics is great, right? And it plays into the political arena where perception in politics is important. But I guess the true test will obviously, as you put it, be in during the polls. And we're talking about people that are filling up the stadium. You're bound to find people that go there, maybe want to listen to the leader, right? That's a given. But how much are we playing, let's take it beyond, how much are we playing in the social media bubble versus actually engaging on the ground? You mentioned issues like climate change, etc., umbrella issues. Sometimes we get numb to these issues because we're not breaking it down and actually giving examples of how this is affecting, you and I. How much are we playing in the space of practicality?
A plain and simple answer, Blaine. South African politicians play an aerial game, and they don't speak and they don't interface personally with South Africans and with particular voters. For instance, let's use an old age of political campaigns, door to door. There are two parties, or let me say 3 parties in this country who effectively do door to door. The ANC, the EFF, the IFP. But that speaks to the type of individuals and voter base that they are speaking to. A Democratic Alliance, for instance, and the Action SA, and to a large extent a Rise Mzansi, does not need and does not have the capability to door to door, because mainly their voters are staying in suburbs, they are staying in estates where you need access control to those particular estates, and door to door for those particular formations that are within suburban areas becomes very difficult due to access to those particular communities because they are largely gated. But within the black voter base, townships, rural areas, it's easy to just open a gate to someone's residence and walk in, try canvass them, give them a t-shirt, give them a pamphlet, and tell them and ask them, are your kids getting social grants? Are they going to school? Are they getting free food? And particular that. And it then creates a perception where these large political formations in the country are pushing a welfare state rather than a state that looks into economic growth and economically empowering their voter base. And that will liberate those particular people to be no longer dependent on the state, where in a country like ours of over 54 million South Africans, you've got about 18.so million who are dependent on government for their livelihood, which is a huge problem where you've got a country that has reached its fiscal ceiling. Right.
It's important here to understand these manifestos, I guess, because to use your example in terms of the door-to-door, it is then when you can hold these people that are canvassing for your votes accountable and ask them the tough questions to get some answers with regards to these manifestos. Brother Maseko, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. That is SABC News politics reporter Samkele Maseko. Context, always important on this program. All right, to our regular Word on the Street feature, where we took to various streets of Johannesburg, seeking obviously diverse views and perspectives on this issue. And this is what you had to say. Take a look.
The manifesto is there to educate about what they plan to do when they do take office. But the execution comes down to the people. So the manifesto and the people should work hand in hand. There's no point having a manifesto that doesn't speak to the people.
So this whole thing of manifestos, it's just a play, it's a game. For us, it's not benefiting us in any way. People are going to manifestos to enjoy their lives because they are bored. It's boredom, they are unemployed.
I think our manifesto are very important. They give a direction and a base as to which political party speaks with you and the voice of the community challenges.
It's only obvious, but they're going for the clothing, for the shirts, maybe the caps and things.
Baba promised 350 they're gonna increase our.
They promised to increase the 350 rand social relief grant, and that's why people flock to the rallies. And these are the rallies which are mostly attended by those that are hungry.
People go there because they are bored. They will not vote. Political parties make empty promises. Currently, we have a lot of unemployed youth who smoke drugs, and most have dropped out of school, and the government isn't assisting.
All right. We do appreciate your thoughts on this matter. Let's get straight to the discussions. The practicality of promises that you hear in these manifestos or during the manifesto launches. Let's put it to the test. We have a number of guests lined up for us tonight. Among them, Angelo Fick, Director of Research at the AWOL Socioeconomic Research Institute, as well as Dirk Kotze, a Professor in Political Science at Unisa. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time. We also have our digital audience. They'll be throwing in some questions. We'll also get your take with regards to this. Angelo, to you first. Look, going into any election, one would hope, as a political party or independent in this regard, your base is secured, right? But to what extent can manifestos sway or hold sway among people on the fence?
So I think Samkele has really outlined very well that many voters don't actually read the full manifesto. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of resources. And that's not often where people's focus can be on a day-to-day basis. So I think manifestos reveal the worldviews of the people who write them. So they really show you what a party imagines the future to be like, or what it thinks the relationship between the present and the future will be. I think parties also speak to themselves, so politicians are really talking to themselves in these manifestos. I think they're talking to the converted, so they're often talking to their own members. But it's very difficult in a country in which politics is increasingly very polarized along party lines. And it's been that way for a while, but I think it's getting more clear that you're going to sway people who are on the fence, and more importantly, that you're going to sway people who are currently critics of yours or don't support you. I think critics will find in manifestos those things that they don't agree with. And I think the role of the media in relaying information about what different political parties have to say about education, health, economy, jobs, international relations, domestic security, all of those I think need to be taken into account, because that's also where people get their information about what parties stand for, in addition to that on-the-ground communication by individual politicians or groups of politicians, when they go into communities or into organizations to talk to people about supporting them.
Professor Kotze, the linear scale of promises during manifestos, let's say from the real and practical to the downright ridiculous, where do political parties tend to play in this day and age?
Well, I think what they are presenting to us, they say, is the outcome of normally a type of consultation process. Some of the, especially the newer parties, Rise Mzansi did it, Busa did it, and others that before they were actually even formed as a political party, they had a very long consultation process of talking and going all over the country. But more established political parties are not necessarily doing that. What the ANC did, for example, is that they had a review of their previous election manifesto of 2019, that they went across the country in order to discuss that as a sort of a review of the past 5 years. So there are different approaches of how political parties are doing it. I think in the end what we are seeing is that many parties have, in some cases they have what they call a policy conference. In other cases they have sort of provincial events where they come together. Some of it comes from the bottom up, from the branches. So there's not a very standard approach that's followed by all of them. In the end, I think a lot comes down to an inner party committee process, where there's a committee that actually writes the election manifesto based on all the inputs that they've received.
Mr. Fick, the realistic nature of a party's policies for the country and its practicality in terms of promises versus the more far-fetched. To what extent does it mirror the party or the independent's proximity to power?
So I think if you're the incumbent, if you're the African National Congress across much of the country, or you're the Democratic Alliance in the Western Cape, you come with a certain kind of advantage. You can point to your achievements, and you can sort of ignore any failures that you may have had. And when your critics pull them up, you simply go back to your achievements. Parties that have not held power, and even the parties that are currently in coalition agreements, it's going to be very difficult for them to point to municipalities where they are in co-governance and claim victories, because in many of those municipalities there are many, many crises that their critics will point to. Realism, I don't think, is a feature of political manifesto issues anywhere in the world. There does have to be a utopian component to them, because you do have to speak to people about a future. And that requires an active imagination. And in South Africa, that future is tied not just to the present, but to the past. And here, the different parties, I think, take a very different view of that past, often have very different views of the present, whether it is on affirmative action, whether it is on employment, whether it is on the economy. And so the future that they project in their policies, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unwittingly, is a future that I think young people have to pay attention to, because in very few of our parties does the party leadership reflect the demographic of the majority of South Africans. Most people in this country are 27 and younger than the country itself. Most of our politicians and leaders in our political parties tend to be 40s and above. In fact, I, at the age of 51, would look young in some of these parties. And so these are not people who are going to live to 2040. And many of the people that I see on screen right now, and the majority of South Africans, are going to have to live to 2040 and 2050. And the test for all voters, all South Africans, will be to what extent do these parties project a future that is livable, inhabitable and manageable for a society like South Africa. And that, I think, is more than just manifestos. It's also listening to them, responding to questions and responding to issues that voters raise.
Don't sell yourself short, sir. You don't look a day over 31. Professor Kotze, with regards to what Angelo was saying, the extent that these manifestos are drawn up to placate certain sections of the audience, certain sections of society, versus trying to feed them a healthy dose of realism and as well as optimism, how do they strike that balance?
Well, I think all political parties present in their election manifestos there's the best case scenarios that they can think of. That is, I tend not to refer to them as promises. It's rather about scenarios. It's about what if they come to power, because the majority of them will not be in power. So how do they present them the vision that they have for the South African society? And how is that sort of articulated by these different policy measures? But I don't take all the policy measures actually in a literal sense. It is not as if they will be able to implement those when they come to power or be within a government. It's rather to reflect how they think, what is their vision, how do they translate their political philosophy or political ideology into more practical terms. And I think, therefore, we do see, in some cases, very strong differences. But at the same time, I must say, the spectrum of policy choices that in the past, and it looks to me now with this election, is actually very limited. Political parties don't use this opportunity to think out of the box to a large extent. And I think a lot of the policies are actually in response to the ANC's policy. That is understandable.
Prof, what would be thinking outside the box?
What to think about, for example, how to use artificial intelligence. I just looked at the program just now. And that is going to present a completely new reality for political parties, for universities, for industry, for many components of it. And I don't see, for example, much in these election manifestos about how that can be used, not to scare people that there will be robots all over the place, but how it can assist us in different directions. I don't see proposals about education. Everyone works with NSFAS as a point of departure. Everyone works with universities as a point of departure. But they don't think about how to restructure, for example, the tertiary sector into all sorts of other forms of training, which will be more suitable, more diverse. There will be more choices than simply everyone going to university. Almost no parties are talking about that. So that's just two examples. There's a lot about energy. I think there's creativity in that regard. But some aspects about, for example, job creation. I don't think there is at this stage a lot of new ideas of how to move beyond the impediments that exist at the moment.
Right. Let's take it to our digital audience and get their take. I want to speak to Ayabulela. If you can unmute. These political or election manifestos, does it influence your vote? To what extent does it compared to your lived reality? Or maybe it should be manifestos plus lived reality equals how you vote, right? Aya?
Yes, you're right. Greetings. I think coming from a very Black background and where I'm from in the Northern Cape, manifestos and all actually influence how I vote. I mean, in some cases, we do have political parties that promise a lot of things and have already led before, and we know what they usually promise in their manifestos. Now, it becomes very difficult sometimes for community members to actually vote for these parties based on the manifestos. But rather the work that is put in by the political party or is put in by the people in leadership, that is what influences my vote. So something pragmatic rather is what will influence my vote rather than something that's written on paper. But also it's very important that manifestos are written on paper so that as a voter, as a person that is growing in democracy, I know that when I look back and this person is already in leadership, I will know that you promised us this and you promised us that. Why is it not delivered? So I think it's also good having a manifesto on paper and writing to people that what you want to do when you are in government, so that I, as a voter, can be able to look back and say, but this has not been done. Thank you.
Right. Important indeed. Acts as a reference, especially if you want to engage or compare or, kind of figure out the direction in which the party or independent is going versus the past realities that you've just experienced. It's very important. Kolani, let's hear your take on the matter. If you can unmute Kolani. All right, go ahead. Oh, it seems that we're battling with Kolani. Let's hear from Gugu. We'll try to get back to you, Kolani. Gugu?
Hello, I am Kwanede, by the way. So my input with manifestos will be mainly that as much as they are influential to a certain extent, what is more important is more than the intention. Like, we hear what you're trying to do. We hear that once you get in power, this is what you're promising the world, this is what you're promising the community. But what is more important is prosecution of your plan. And I think also when it comes to the community as a whole, what is more important is access to the manifestos. Like, I think V mentioned that in some areas, it is mostly difficult to access these manifestos because, okay, it is on the news, it is online, but what about people that do not have access to internet, do not have access to TV, to media in general? So most people do not understand their manifestos also because deliverance is also important. So they are quite influential, but to people that do not have access to the manifesto itself and understand what is being said to them, it's not really effective with them.
Right. Angelo, I mean, tackling the triple threat of poverty, unemployment, inequality, important, no doubt. Policies, having policies, good policies is one thing. Implementing them is another, right? Does the electorate get a clear path of policy implementation from these manifestos? Or is the path riddled with potholes that leaves both the politician and the voter confused?
So I think something that Google raised is very important in this regard. Most of these manifestos will be launched in one language only. They'll be launched in Isingesi, they'll be launched in English. We have a country in which 8 out of 10 10-year-olds for almost a decade haven't been able to read full meaning in any language. And so what you're dealing with is a communication problem between parties and the electorate, but also it reveals what kind of country these political organizations imagine they live in. They seem to sketch a country in which English is the language of dominance. English is the language that we must all slot into. And I think that that alienates a whole group of young people who've been told that no, their languages matter because these are official languages of the country. And yet they don't hear themselves spoken to in these texts. They will hear themselves spoken to when the politicians come to the neighborhood. But the manifestos are not in that language. The second problem, I think, is whether or not when people read these manifestos, can they see that there are contradictions? So people will propose policies around, job creation, but they will have very poor policies on education linking to that change in the economy. Their local government legislation will not talk about undoing the social and the spatial logics of apartheid and colonialism to integrate economic growth across our towns and cities. They will have very strange ideas about agriculture in a country in which only 12% of the land is arable, in which the climate catastrophe is unfolding, and so future food production is going to be an issue. They will have very strange ideas about how to keep strangers out of the state by improved borders, as if there isn't an increasing migration problem because of climate catastrophe, food insecurity, and other forms of insecurity across the world, which will make any fence you put at the Limpopo River, look like a kind of Lego fence that you can crawl across. So my sense is that, younger people are going to have to pay attention to the internal contradictions and to ask tough questions of political parties about how they're going to integrate the different views that they have. So what will happen to skills provision if you get rid of all these people that you say are inconvenient because they're strangers? What will happen in the tertiary sector if we cut funding not just to students but to actual tertiary institutions, including TVET colleges? What happens when we undervalue the civil service by not giving them proper pay increases? If we propose pay increases, where does that money come from? Is anybody mentioning a wealth tax? Is anybody mentioning capital gains tax changes? Are we lowering corporate taxes to create business-friendly environments, but what controls do we have around how are we regulating that businesses are not just operating for profit, but in a developmental state that government maintains its regulatory function on the private sector? And those, I think, are gaps in many of these policy documents that, unfortunately, if you sit with a country in which 8 out of 10-year-olds can't read for meaning, those will slip through the gaps because people will cherry pick which issues speak to them in this moment and not have a holistic view. And, politicians will exploit this, and you can't blame them for it. Politicians want power, and they'll get it in whichever way they need to get it. And so it's important that younger people are, helped to be able to read these things and ask the critical questions so that they're critically literate in relation to the politics, precisely so they can take ownership of the politics away from just politicians and political organizations. Because while those are important, I think eventually the politics should belong to all of us who live here.
Look, I guess the only way that electorate can ask the critical questions, if they understand it, if they digest it, if it's written in their language that they understand, important indeed. The media also plays a huge role in terms of contextualizing. You can put all the facts that you want, but facts mean nothing without context, right? We're going to talk about the manifestos. It's not legally binding, but we're not kept in terms of policies, in terms of promises. It does something far greater, I think, in terms of disillusionment. Frustration creates adversity. And when people are frustrated, they tend to shy away sometimes of the ballot box. You don't want that to happen. You want them to exercise the franchise. How? Politicians need to engage further. We're going to discuss. Quick break, more next. Yeah, we are in election season. A lot of nuances as well in terms of what we see and what is reality. Optics, perceptions. What about packed stadiums? How does that translate in terms of voting, actual voting on election day? The question we're asking in this day and age, does the manifestos hold sway over you? Does it influence the way you vote? Let us know at its Topical SABC. I want to take it straight to our digital audience now. Let's try to speak to Kolani again. Your thoughts, sir?
Greetings to everyone and the viewers. Well, my thoughts are mostly about political manifestos. It's just that they are not really seen by most people, especially mostly, I'm going to speak about the black electorate, if I can say. Because most of the black constituencies are perhaps since the 1994 elections, there's been that condition to perhaps look at things from a race perspective. In the sense of that, it's the party that you are perhaps voting for, is it led by a black individual or a white individual? So those are the type of things that shape the ideas about the type of parties we vote for, and never about the manifestos most usually. So it's usually at less times where you see manifestos come out. Like now, the manifestos must come out 3 months close to the election date. So
right.
It's not easy for most people to be swayed by such things, especially in terms of most probably people that look at media. So
right.
They never get the idea and perspective of manifestos in their full form, but rather they're influenced by media. And perhaps, if I've mentioned, the whole idea of perspective.
Polani, interesting point, thank you. Professor Kotze, to what extent, to Polani's point, are people still voting along so-called racial lines?
Well, that does happen in some, but I think what we've seen, especially amongst the bigger parties, that there has been some changes, that they have moved their votes sideways into different parties. But it's also interesting what we saw, for example, in 2019's election, is that voters voted for one party at national level and for other party at provincial level. So I think it depends rather, it becomes more strategic, the way in which voters are looking at who they are going to support. And then also, if there's, for example, a new party, and then there's obviously the other big issue that we haven't talked about really, is the fact that voter turnout has declined. That means some people are just not able to vote because they believe that there's not the choice that they can make is available on ballot paper.
Yeah. Letitia, let's bring you in. Read the manifesto so you have an informed decision base in order to make your vote. Does the party or person align to your needs and wants? That's the advice, right? But as we've been discussing, it goes beyond the actual what's on paper. It's the feel. It's whether you can trust the leader of that party or the independent in this regard. Does that resonate with you?
Thank you, Blaine, and good evening, everyone. That's a very good question, actually. So what I've realized is that a manifesto, like you said, is just something that is written on paper. And I feel like that a lot of people don't actually engage with a manifesto. People base their votes on actions. So, for example, if people feel that the ANC took them out of apartheid, they will vote for that party. If people are looking for land reform, they'll vote for the EFF. And people are looking for a party that will align with the business interest, and they will vote for the DA. So the interest is not necessarily in the manifesto, but it is what in how the party can speak the language that they speak, or help them to achieve whatever it is that they want to achieve. So I think also there's a lack of engagement with the manifesto. So I think to answer your question, Blaine, I think people don't invest a lot of time or a lot of effort into reading the manifesto or what it stands for. And I think also if you look at the length of all the manifestos, for example, the EFF has about 260 pages of the manifesto. I don't think that everyone will have time to go through everything. So they look at what the party has done, and then they base their vote on what the party has manifested from that manifesto. So I think people are shifting from what is on paper, because somebody mentioned something about the lack of implementation. And I feel like people are tired of all these promises. People want action. So in as much as a certain party can have a great manifesto, a great plan, great policies, people want action.
Yeah.
So I think dynamics are changing.
Angelo, from what Letitia is saying, what can parties learn, independents learn in terms of breaking down these broad umbrella issues? Samkele Maseko earlier was talking about the issue of climate change and how it relates to the people in various communities, rural areas, etc. But maybe there's a disjuncture between understanding the broad concept of climate change and how it's practically or the consequence of climate change on the ground. What can politicians learn from this?
So I think not only politicians, but I think journalists should also be learning something. You know, so people can't just, you know, go to a 200-page document for 6 different parties and look at them. And the role of the media as mediating what political parties are saying, but also critiquing them, because the role of the media is not just to go, well, party X says this and party Y says that. They also have to interrogate whether or not those make sense. And on climate catastrophe, I think there is much more work to be done by all concerned. I find that party political manifestos often mistake climate change for weather change. They mistake the climate catastrophe for something that is inconvenient and not unfolding and with us and going to be civilizationally challenging. They, you know, don't refer to the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They don't refer to any of the science on this, and they often speak against the science. And I find that often the South African media, the journalists, the outlets, don't have dedicated reporters who can understand the science of climate catastrophe and then make sense of these manifestos in that. So they will talk about mitigating strategies, they will talk about green energy, and they'll mention things like green hydrogen as a solution to the climate catastrophe, which it certainly isn't. And so my sense is that what's important in these manifestos is that people have access to information about them if they don't have access to the manifestos itself, that they should have the tools to be able to ask politicians who then come to their communities questions about those manifestos, so that the manifesto is not the make or break of whether you vote for a party. It's information that is given to citizens to be able for them to engage in the business of politics, which is asking questions, informing themselves by interacting with politicians. And that, I think, is something that is not just the citizens' responsibility in relation to a manifesto, but also the role of the media as the fourth estate is to communicate what's inside these manifestos and to communicate honestly about what's in them, to critique them, to allow critics of these manifestos in, and to interrogate them when necessary. You know, if an economic policy suggests something that isn't realizable, there should be serious academic economists who've studied the field who can say to you, this is not going to be a solution. These plans will not work. They've been tried in this country, in that state, in this polity. And too often it is simply a platform in media for politicians to hold forth. They're asked a few kind of questions that are kind of anodyne, but they're never interrogated on the logic, content and substance of their manifestos. And that, I think, is a real problem, particularly in a country that faces the literacy challenges of South Africa.
Yeah, point taken. Catchphrases makes us, as the media practitioners, look smart, I think, but we do a disservice if we don't break it down. And, you know, help our viewers, help the audience understand the practicalities, the legalities and the realities in terms of what we're dealing with. Important indeed, Mr. Fick. Let's go to Makano. Makano?
Hi, good afternoon to you and your viewers, sir. Also, I think politics is basically a game of cult of personality. So we follow people who we want to follow. And so basically, I'm sorry. So basically, it's a cult of personality. We follow people that we want to follow. We don't really do much research on what we want to, on the policies they want to implement. If you look at the top 4 political parties' manifestos, basically they're speaking about the same thing, and they're not really challenging each other on saying that we are going to do this better. It's it's reactionary from, you know, it reacts from this piece of policy suggested by this opposition party.
Let's just bring you in and just get a sense. How much do your peers, the community you live in, rely solely on media to interpret manifestos versus actually reading them?
Thank you very much once again. You know, media has a very big influence in how they influence a lot of people. I mean, there could be propaganda of a certain party, and when I see it on media, I will already think that this is what it is. So media has a very big influence, whether it is on radio, whether it is on television, whether on any social media platform. Media can actually influence a person, and I, for one, can be also influenced by media in how I vote. And I think I talk for everyone, maybe in the Black communities, that in most cases, other than manifestos and the work that's being done on the ground by certain political leaders, media can have a very great influence.
Professor Kotze, I just want to shift gears a bit with regards to what we hear in the manifestos. And of course, the ideology of the party, of the person, comes through very strongly. I just want to get to a point where we understand, how does that influence in terms of coalition talks? Some citizens have expressed their reservations with regards to coalitions, and they cite what's happening at a local government level currently. How do we better marry parties if it's going to get to a state where we are going to see coalitions at a provincial and national level?
Well, first of all, what we are going to see in this election and previous elections the same, and in future, I guess it will be the same, is that parties don't present themselves as part of a coalition yet, or part of an alliance. What we've seen now with the multi-party charter is that we know of parties who have coalesced, who have come together, but they don't have one policy proposal, one election manifesto for the group as a whole. So it is because coalitions are in a sense unpredictable. We don't know who's going to come together with whom. It means that we can't really sort of see already a convergence of policies. Ideally speaking.
Oops. Professor Kotze? Oh, I think we lost his line. They will try to redial Professor Kotze in a short while. We also lost the digital audience as well. All right. Did we lose everyone? Control? All right. Listen. So we are trying to explain or pull back the curtain, so to speak, with regards to manifestos and its influence currently. You heard from the digital audience. You heard from the analysts as well. Not everybody reads these manifestos. To what extent is the onus on media to contextualize it to the fullest of its potential on how it can influence your life? It is very, very important indeed. But as we've been saying, you can list all the facts you want, but facts mean nothing without context. I understand that we have a digital audience back. Nope. All right. Let's do the question of the day. We might have some tweets as well. We'll try to bring it to you, get a sense of where your head and heart is with regards to this. So we're asking you, in this day and age, what impact do election manifestos have in the way you vote? You can let us know at It's Topical SABC. Let's put up some of your tweets. Take a look at what you have to say. All right, Thoughts Rhyme says they have a profound impact. That's how I decide who to vote for. All right, it's going a bit fast there. Alvis says that ideally votes are supposed to be the choosing of a party that will improve services from the incumbent, or choose, oops, I'm sorry, it's just going too fast for me. Tabo, none. They are just wishes from political parties, and they should get to govern. They will do this, do that. So that's some of your thoughts with regards to this. All right, let's get to the next one. All right, let's see, Emmanuel. Majority of the manifestos are almost the same, with promises and less strategy. So there's less impact on voting as compared to registering to vote. Parties should do more community activities than relying on manifestos, says Emmanuel. All right. Let's try to bring back our digital audience. I wonder if our guests are there as well. Let's bring them up, get their final take. There we go. Thank you so much. Gremlins in the system. But thanks for staying with us. Let's get final thoughts. Angelo, Fick, with regards to how do we were talking about coalitions. How do we eradicate the incoherence between coalition partners? Angelo, you there? All right, it seems that
I don't think any of us can hear Blaine from...
All right, it seems that they can't hear. Let's try one more time with Kolani. Kolani, can you hear me?
So I presume somebody in the...
All right, no. It seems that we're having some issues with regards to that. All right. Let me, look, we'll have to wrap it up now, but unfortunately we lost the line. But you got the gist, right? In terms of what we're talking about, in terms of the importance of manifestos. It's about understanding what is being promised to you, and thereby, look, these politicians, these independents, whoever is coming, they're going to come and knock on your door, right? They're going to come with loud hailers. It is that opportunity to use, to question them about the manifestos. It's important. All right, before we go, here's my take. Over the last 2 years or so, you've heard me speak about getting to a better place. And I use this phrase as an expression of the idea of progress, of improvement for you and your family, and the actioning of hope. Hope in the belief that there are people who truly have your best interests at heart. And I hear you saying, don't be naive, Blaine. Enough with the ignorance. I get your frustration, right? I also understand the need for a realistic sense of optimism. But without action and hope, why do we even bother to vote? We exercise the franchise in the hope of better. Yes, the political field of play seems to be wide, right? But it's about scoring these political players according to your needs. It's about figuring it out which party or which independent has the level of urgency that is needed to address your community's concerns. In the main, manifestos are objectives, declarations of intentions. So it's important to digest, given. But ultimately, it is up to you and your family to cut the noise and focus on what's good for this nation. It can't sit at a dream stage. I have a dream. You probably have a different dream for this country. But the big question is, when are we going to live the dream? Right? It is in the answering of this question that shapes our strategy of getting to better. And that's my take. If you miss anything on this program, be sure to watch this episode of It's Topical on YouTube. Sports Live up next. We thank our digital audience as well for joining us, as well as our guests. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.